I'm Fernando Coelho. I've been in the gun industry for a little bit over 30 years. I started Triton Cartridge back in the early 90s, an ammunition company in upstate New York. And after that, I developed 2 clothing lines. 15 years ago, I started Panteo Productions. This is the next installment of Inside Story, the OG Gathering. In this installment, we get together with some gun writers and firearms instructors from the industry that have been in the industry longer than I have. And now we have an opportunity to sit down and find out what's changed from back then to today. So let's get to it. So Dave, how long has it been that we've been in the gun industry? How long have you been in the industry?
I published my first article in a subscription magazine in 1988. So it's been a long time.
88, holy shit. I got into the industry in the 90s, 93. So that would explain what, yep, okay. I can't believe it's been this long.
It's gone by fast, hasn't it?
I still remember you and I interacting when I was in the ammo business.
Right.
So
New Orleans SHOT Show.
it was New Orleans.
Yes, it was.
When everyone was getting robbed as they're walking out of the show.
They stole my camera right from below my legs.
Did they really?
Yeah.
Oh my God, all I remember is the smell of urine outside and restaurants that were packed because that area could not handle the inflow of people from SHOT.
It wasn't my favorite SHOT Show.
No, I think they only did it once in New Orleans.
Yeah, they did. I'm Dave Spalding. I'm a 35-year law enforcement veteran with a wide variety of assignments, everything from working the floors of the county jail and court security to undercover operations and SWAT. I was also a firearms trainer and supervisor of my agency's training unit. I was the 2010 Law Enforcement Trainer of the Year, which led me to start my own firearms training company that was called Handgun Combatives. I recently retired from that business, shut it down, and now I'm basically a husband, a father, a grandfather, and a man of leisure.
Look who's here. Looks good to see you, Mike. Good to see you.
Likewise.
All right, we're talking about reminiscing a little bit.
Okay.
So I've known you a long time too.
Yes, you have.
Now, when did you get in?
88 when I published my first
88.
one.
So we're trying to figure out who's been in the industry the longest. So he published his first article in 1988. I got into it in 93 with Triton. Mm-hmm. When did you start in the gun industry?
Around the same time Dave did. I started writing a little bit for some of the smaller trade magazines, probably late 1980s. Things like International Game Warden, Police Marksman, things like that. I was trying to establish myself as a trainer, so I thought a good way of doing that was get some credibility and publish a couple things. At some point in time, I had reached out to Combat Handguns and Harry Kane. Surprisingly, he bought the article, and that's how it all started for me. And from there, it just went on and on. You know, he wanted more stuff, and I was more than happy to oblige him.
So we're all from the same era so far?
Writing the magazine articles was a lot better than working overtime traffic details and off-duty movie theater security and all the other stuff I was doing.
You were on the job?
Yes.
You were on the job?
Correct. My name is Mike Boyle. I am a retired law enforcement officer. I worked for a medium-sized agency for 27 years. I retired and went back there part-time as a trainer, which I continue to do this very day. Unlike my esteemed associates here today, I really don't have a great deal of experience training in the private sector. To this day, I train mostly law enforcement officers, and the big difference as I see it, in the private sector, those folks want to be there. I have to train people who would rather be probably getting a root canal sometimes. I got involved in writing for the gun rags, somewhere in the late 1980s, and I wanted to enhance my credibility as a trainer. And I figured the best way to do that was get some ink on paper and out for folks to read. So here we are today, 40 years later. The game has changed quite a bit on my watch. I'm glad to be part of it yet and hope to continue to do so for some years. I'm downshifting now. No one wants to see some old geezer in front of a group. So here we are today. But yet again, I hope to stay at it for a little bit longer and enjoy some of the fun things in life while I still can.
And I remember from that time period, I remember coming out to see you with gelatin in New Jersey. We brought gelatin to shoot, do a gelatin demo for ammo.
Yes.
God, I used to hate mixing that stuff.
Well, this stuff was awful.
Oh God,
Yeah.
that I still can smell. Like if I'm making Jello at home,
When that stuff would start to heat up.
Oh
man.
God, it was a
Yeah.
mess.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of a mess.
Speaking of a
Oh,
mess.
Here we go. Good to see you, John. All right. I'll abuse you the same way.
Please.
We're trying to see who's been in the industry the longest of us as the old timers. When did you get into the industry?
I got in this industry shortly after my release from active duty from the Marine Corps, and that would have been 1968.
Oh shit. I was born in '68. I feel young right now. I am digging this. I'm happy you're here today. Oh, this is awesome.
You started to work for Dualitron right away, right?
Well, I bought one of their systems, and then I took it on the road and trained people with it. I became a police officer in 1970.
Yeah.
And then I started doing training on the side, and before long it became a...
If I remember my history correctly, you were the first traveling firearms instructor.
I'm not sure, but I was certainly one of the first, and I decided that I was so impassioned about training that I decided to take this on the road. I worked with lots of police departments, and like you, I approached several publishers, and in a moment of weakness, they published some of my stuff. And I'm Sean Farnham. In 1968, I was a young Marine, second lieutenant, infantry in Vietnam. On my 51st day in country, I got my third Purple Heart and was sent home. Fortunately, I lived through it. Most of my friends didn't. Later on, I became a police officer, and currently I'm on my 54th year of law enforcement. I'm a deputy sheriff with Park County in Colorado. But most of my adult life I spent running around the country and around the world, training people in the art and science of defensive shooting. It is my great privilege and honor to have among my friends my colleagues here today. And like Mike, I'm having too much fun to quit.
Well, we had one person that was still supposed to come out, Ken Hackathorn. He couldn't make it, flight issues. I wish he could have been here. But we're still waiting on one more that should be on his way here. Masada Ayub, I've known him a long time as well, going back to the 90s. In fact, he was one of my distributors for my ammunition back like in 95 or so.
Yeah.
So whenever, speaking of the devil, oh my God, here he is.
I can tell you, I'm pretty sure that he's been in the industry a long time.
Moss.
I read his
Good to see you.
article when I was in the police academy.
Yes, me too.
I will also admit, before I got into the gun industry, I was working at a nuclear power plant in New York, at Indian Point, and I remember reading his articles, and I felt like it was an honor having him distribute my ammo when I got into the ammo business. So, Moss, all right, so we're trying to figure out who's been in the industry the longest. So far, John Farnham over here has everybody beat.
Still John. All of us who are traveling instructors should be lighting a candle to him because he was the one who really started that trend. My first article appeared in Gunsport magazine, February 1971 issue. Began as a police instructor in 1972 and training armed citizens in 81. Along the way, 19 years as chair of the Firearms Deadly Force Committee for American Society of Law Enforcement Trainers. 20-some years now on the board for International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association. My name is Masada Ayub. I've been in the industry since 1971. 43 years as a part-time sworn officer, 8 years as patrolman in the first department, 2 years as sergeant, 6 as lieutenant on the second, 27 as captain on the third and final department, from which I retired in 2017.
I will say this, I am honored to be amongst you guys because I remember reading the articles. I remember working with you guys from the very beginning when I got into the ammo business, and back in the day, you had to pay your dues when you got in. And I still remember some people like, you guys probably remember Walt Roush?
Good friend.
Yes.
Good man.
Awesome man, awesome. I still remember being at SHOT Show, my first SHOT Show, and I had the 45 Super on display. And he came by, and I didn't know him from Adam. I just knew he was a writer. I read his stuff, and I was just like enamored. I got Walt Roush here, right? And I said, he says to me, so what's this 45 Super? And I honestly thought I was just going to educate him on the merits of why it's such a good thing. So I went on to tell him that, well, with your 1911, you could run 45 Super and you don't have to change anything. You can then drop out the mag, load it up with 45 ACP. You don't have to change the springs. And the brass will just dribble out a little bit, but it'll work with both. And unfortunately, he took that as this young whippersnapper is telling him about 1911s. That didn't go over so well. Afterwards, it's like, oh shit, I pissed him off. A few years later, I ran into him at an event that was going on in New York. They were bringing in a bunch of newspaper folks, like from the Daily News and the Post, and they were bringing them to Westchester County to some gun range. And they were going to show them, here's a .22 rifle, here's a 9mm pistol. We're going to shoot some steel targets. And he was there. And we hit it off, and I apologized to him. I said, I wasn't trying to tell you what you already knew. But it was awesome. He was a great guy. Anyway, I'm happy to have you guys together because this is something I've wanted to do for a long time, is to have a no filters, no holds. We're going to talk about the gun industry. We're going to talk about things that a lot of people probably don't even know about the gun industry today, or about guns today and ammo today. So I think this is going to be fun.
Well, you know, notice something about this group, and Ken would be the same if he was still here. We all wrote because we were trainers and practitioners. We never intended to be writers. It supplemented what we really were passionate about, and that was showing people how to do this and to do it well.
And I still look at it as, when you guys are writing, you had the credibility and the background to support it. You didn't just become a writer because you liked writing and now that's the first time you handled a gun.
The editors wouldn't let you do that. The editors of our time, I can remember Harry Kane asking me some very pointed questions about my background because he wanted to make sure I had the background to write about the topics that I was going to be writing about.
Yes.
He was very much against just some Gomer that could put words on page. He didn't care about that. He wanted the real people.
Oh, but they were all like that.
Well,
Good editors are gatekeepers.
Yes, yes. Well, I tell you what, we have coffee inside. We have a place for us to sit. I promise not to abuse you guys too badly, as long as you guys don't throw stuff at me and try to hit me like I know you want to. And I'm staying away from you when we're sitting down. I know how you are. And Moss is the sneaky one. You have to be careful with Moss, because all of a sudden he's behind you and you don't know it.
Actually, I'm elderly and harmless.
All right, guys. Well, let's head inside and let's go talk.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
Okay, let's do it.
I've been extremely fortunate to be in the gun industry in the time period that I have. In the last 30 years, things have changed a lot. And with the folks that I've gathered for this get-together, I think we're going to have a good opportunity to talk about what has changed, what has not changed, what's gone for the better, and what's gone for the worse. So let's go sit down and hear what they have to say. Well, gentlemen, thanks again for coming out. I really appreciate it. And the best thing for us to do is just jump right into it. I compiled a bunch of talking points that I felt are relevant to the industry that we're all in, going back to when we first got into the industry to today, because I figured there's a lot of things that have changed over the years, and there's a lot of things that have fallen out of vogue that are back. People think is new for the first time. I remember cocking serrations on a 1911, first time that came out. Saw that years ago. And then like 15 years later, they're like, wow, look, cocking serrations in the front. That's old school. We already did that. So first thing I wanted to talk about, print magazines and writing. That's one of the areas. What was it like reviewing guns and writing for the gun magazines? Dave, we'll start with you.
This is going to sound strange, but it wasn't something I would have picked. It was something that kind of came my way. And when I found out I could make more money doing that than working overtime at movie theaters and doing traffic posts and stuff like that, I ended up pursuing it. It was a good experience. I really enjoyed it. I met a lot of good people. I learned an awful lot about the English language. I thought I was pretty good at it until I actually started writing and had to make an editor happy.
Oh boy.
But yeah, but I mean, because I was a gun enthusiast, and of course all the gear that comes with that, having that stuff just sent to you time and time again, and it was really nice, because I got to see the stuff when it was new and all of that kind of thing. But writing could also be a challenge. When you're given an assignment about something you could care less about, but you had to enthusiastically review it. Now, I was fortunate that none of my editors ever made me write something that I didn't believe. If something was a poor product, I just didn't do anything with it. I just sent it back, and most of the editors understood that. But it was good. I have really fond memories of it, but I can't say that I miss it now that I'm not really doing it all the time.
Much like Dave, I kind of got into this by accident. You know, prior to writing for the magazines, I probably never wrote anything in my life that somebody literally had the gun to my head like a school assignment. You got to do this, kid. But it got to be fun, and you know, I got lucky early on, and one of the first guys I got hooked up with in the magazine world was Harry Kane from Harris Publications, and he was very good to us. And like David said, you know, I had a stay-at-home mom. My wife took care of the kids, and you know, I was struggling to make ends meet. You know, living not quite paycheck to paycheck, but it was pretty tight. And when I found out you actually got paid money for this stuff, wow, it's pretty cool. And better yet, cool stuff would come. You know, it would just show up. The UPS man would come and put a box on your doorstep. So it was a fun time. I enjoyed it. You know, it had changed over time as the print magazines got smaller and smaller, and we found out we were the guys putting the words between the advertising. And clearly, that's the way this ended up. You know, I don't do nearly as much now as I did back then. I still dabble in it. I have a couple guys I try to keep happy and send them a piece or two a month, but it was a fun ride.
The advantage of it when you're an enthusiast is when you're writing it up for publication, you get to call the factory, talk with the engineers who designed it, find out what were the design parameters, who did the design work. I always tried to give them credit for that. And it was amazing how many companies would not give credit to their individual engineer who had led the project. But I think that added a better dimension to the article itself. And certainly for us, it was way more enjoyable than just calling the factory saying, what's the story on this? And they never call you back because you're just one guy who bought one gun.
It did give you access that the typical people didn't get.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.
For one, I'm not comfortable endorsing products.
It's hard, isn't it?
Well, it suggests that I stand to benefit financially from the success of a product. I want to be free to say terrible things about all of them, and I do. I'm happy to recommend things that I like, but the suggestion that you're a paid endorser, as it were, I'm not interested. I'm not comfortable with that arrangement at all.
When the editors would let you write something that you're enthusiastic about, you know, in my case, it was more the human performance issues and things, mindset, state of mind. I enjoyed doing that stuff. The product reviews were just part of it. And like John said, it's really tough to, you don't want it to be too glowing because it looks like you're actually endorsing this. So that was probably the part I didn't enjoy.
Yeah.
My approach is a little different from John's. My gradation of it was, if it's good, I'll say it's good. If it's great, I'll say it's great, and I'll probably buy the test sample, hopefully at Writer's discount, which was generally wholesale. And if it was absolutely fabulous, I would get in on the ground floor with it and become a distributor, as I did with Triton ammunition, Corbon ammunition, Second Chance body armor in the early days, and the Wolf ears, the Gentex active hearing protectors that were the first of their kind. Where the trouble came was if it was crap, I said it was crap. And The companies didn't like that much. I got banned at various times from Smith & Wesson, Charter Arms, Glock. Glock at one point, under a guy who's no longer there, pulled out more than $1 million worth of advertising from the PDC group, Guns, American Handgun or Shooting Industry, and said, we'll come back and advertise with you after you fire AU. And to his great credit, George von Rosen, the publisher and founder, basically said, screw you, our readers getting honest stuff is more important than us getting the advertising. And that's why I've stayed, one of the main reasons I've stayed with PDC all these years, in addition to good editors.
Very good.
I remember those days when you were distributing our ammunition to Triton. You first looked at the ammo, tested the ammo, did the gelatin testing, looked
Went
at
out
the
and killed a
ballistics.
few animals with the...
You talked to Tom Brzezinski, the inventor of our Quick Shock, numerous times.
Yeah.
And when you came on board, it was after you already were comfortable with it, and it was tested, it was proven, and that actually, I will admit, that gave us some credibility as well, because when you said, I'm getting behind this, that really helped us tremendously, and you were writing about it, Mike was writing about it, it helped us as well, which, it's interesting, guns and ammo, back in the day, testing guns and testing ammunition, I remember the roundups that there used to be, an ammo roundup, for instance. Ed Sano, Evan Marshall, and others used to do those on a regular basis. You did them, you did them as well. But have they fallen out of favor? I mean, what changed?
Hard to say. The editors go with what sells the magazines. When I started, it was not uncommon for a feature article to run 3,000 words. Today, it's likely to be 1,200, 1,500 tops. But with more pictures, bigger pictures, public tastes simply change. The editors listen to the readers, who, after all, are their customers. So you do see those changes over the years. We see less coverage of the competitions in the gun magazines than we used to. And I honestly kind of miss that. Because from readers I talk to, even the ones who don't compete themselves, are interested to see who are the champions of my sport, even though I'm not competing in it, for money or for trophies.
I remember American Handgunner, in fact. It wasn't American Handgunner, mostly it was the magazine that had all the matches.
When Cameron Hopkins was the editor, yeah.
I remember Joe Zambone from MagSafe Ammo. He had a 2-hour VHS tape, and it was literally, I think it was longer, the tape ran out at 2 hours, but the whole thing was him shooting milk jugs, gelatin blocks formed in milk jugs.
Yes.
And he would take these blocks of gelatin and he would shoot. I'll never forget, you'd see the table, the block of gelatin, and he'd walk up out of frame and he'd say, okay, I'm going to shoot the Winchester Black Talon. Let's see what this does. And he'd hold the box up to the camera and he'd shoot that block of gel. And it was 2 hours nonstop of that. I mean, but I haven't seen it. I mean, Dave, have you seen any more gelatin testing?
There's some people online that are doing it, on the YouTube videos and stuff like that. You don't see it too much in the remaining print magazines or anything like that. I mean, let's be honest, the classic gelatin FBI protocols is really a pain in the butt to work with. And like Mike said, when it starts to degrade, it really starts to smell. And I just don't think it's something the current generation of researcher is going to do. They're going to buy those preformed blocks that they can send in the mail, and they're going to shoot that and stuff like that. So. No, you just don't really see that kind of stuff like Mike described anymore.
I think we all have an exaggerated notion of the power contained in these pathetic pop guns we carry around. They're just pistols. And as Mass pointed out, publishers are anxious to fill their pages of their magazines with all kinds of controversial nonsense. So all their, advertisers, they can tell their advertisers that people are reading this stuff. But
I had more than one editor tell me he liked articles with verses in the title. Really? Yeah. Yeah.
That was
9mm versus 45, isosceles versus Weaver, revolver versus pistol, and all that stuff.
I've had conversations with CEOs of gun companies at the SHOT Show who make the mistake of asking me what I think of their product. And I launch into this, my usual boring, diatribe about what I like and what I don't like. But I get reminded that usually a few minutes into my lecture, John, they will tell me, we manufacture lots of guns and we sell them to lots of different people for lots of different reasons. There are collectors that buy our guns who never shoot them. There are people who buy them for all kinds of reasons. The reason that my interest is restricted to what we call the serious use of guns, using guns to shoot people. And he said, you represent maybe 2 or 3% of the people who buy guns. Everybody else wants them for competition or, other what we might call non-serious uses. We sell them guns too, and we don't really care why they buy them as long as their checks don't bounce. Yeah, I get it. I get it. As a manufacturer, in a marketing department, yeah, I get it. You have to do stuff that sells product. One thing I think I can say with a high degree of confidence, you aren't going to hear about the John Farnham Gun Company anytime soon. I'm probably not going to put my money where my mouth is and make the perfect gun. So we trainers, all of us, are going to have to use what the manufacturers give us, both guns and ammunition. And as Matt's pointed out, these guns are designed by engineers, most of whom don't carry a gun, most of whom don't even own a gun. But they're good at designing stuff, and the companies know how to manufacture. I don't know any of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And they produce a product, and then we do our best to train around it for our particular purposes. And again, I have no interest in competition or any of that. My interest is strictly in what we call the serious use of guns. But I realize other people do, and they have legitimate reasons. I don't fault them for it. I just have nowhere to sit in myself.
Well, that brings me to a talking point here. Publications. Going down the list, there used to be Soldier of Fortune, Eagle, SWAT, Gun World, Pistolero. There was Harris Publications with Guns and Weapons for Law Enforcement, Combat Handguns. Then that became Athlon. But these were all print publications. Publications. But today, and not just in the gun industry, I'm watching this all over. Right. This Old House magazine, I used to love getting This Old House. It went away. Many other magazines have gone either digital or completely gone. What are you guys' thoughts on this, the demise of the print publications?
Well, Moss pretty much hit on it, that there's still some out there, but they're much different than what they used to be. The articles are much shorter. The pictures are large, they're glossy. They're trying to compete with the stuff that's online. And that's got to be tough because everybody can just go in there and get on their computer and there they're at. They don't have to go out to the grocery store and pick it up and purchase it. I'm quite frankly surprised that print gun magazines still exist. I really am. I thought they'd be gone by now, but some of them are hanging on, and I guess they're doing okay. But from what they tell me, their readership are like 50 and older. Yes. It's not the 20-somethings that are going out and buying gun magazines.
I suspect the same is true of skin magazines. I think when you go to the internet and see everything you might see in a skin magazine, why'd you want to buy a skin magazine?
I wasn't going to go there. I was
All you got to do is just go into a store that used to carry, that had a big magazine rack.
Right.
And they're gone. They're much smaller, and there's just a few that are still out there hanging on,
I went into a Barnes & Noble not that long ago, and I was, shocked to find a Barnes & Noble that actually still had books. And I went into the magazine section, and it used to be this long aisle.
Yeah, right.
And I went there, and I looked, and it was a third of that.
Right.
And then the gun magazines was just this little section. and most of it was glorified annuals or biannuals, and I was surprised. I mean, Moss, what do you think?
Well, it's natural evolution. We're seeing it no matter what the subject matter. Car magazines, gun magazines. The outdoor sports magazines have really shrunk.
In the gun industry, we have at least 2 anchor publications. Don't want to start naming names, but one typically averaged well over 1 million subscribers. And I did a look recently, and they're down to 350,000.
Wow.
From well over 1 million. And I'm not talking about like the NRA's publication, which is membership driven, but I'm talking about a magazine you subscribe to. It was 300 some odd thousand. All right, gentlemen, let's go to trends in the gun industry. I'd like to talk about that a little bit. The 9mm versus 45 ACP days. Entire magazines were written on that. Entire companies carried that wave.
Okay, I'm going to start this.
Go for it.
God bless his heart. I have very strong affinity for the man. Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Cooper was probably the first influencer, at least in our realm here. And he had the whole world convinced that the 45 ACP was far superior to anything else. And if you cared anything other than that, you were probably going to die your next gunfight. And now we look back at it historically and we realize he had no real basis for saying that. That was just his opinion. And he said it very vigorously, and we all went along with it. Back in those days, I wouldn't say it out loud because, who was I? I was nobody. But I looked at these 2 projectiles, and if you look at a 45 slug, it's probably about the size of my thumb, about this big. And I used to look at that, and when you hold it in your hand, wow, that's big. But when you would take it and you would put it up against the human torso, you came to realize that all these projectiles were pretty small and pretty feeble. Yeah. And it really, in my mind, it was like, one shot's probably not going to stop anybody unless they're just predisposed to being shot. So it was like, you better shoot them until they think they're dead because your perspective really doesn't matter, which really came down to marksmanship. You needed to hit these people in a relatively small part of the body pretty quickly. And that
And multiple times.
is difficult. Yeah, I mean, that is really difficult to do. So I don't know, I guess I look at it now, and though I was involved in that whole controversy, I look back at it now and chuckle and think, but I guess we were all kind of wrapped up in it.
Well, they're all pathetic pop guns, as I mentioned earlier, and we carry these things around thinking we're armed. And as Dave pointed out, when it becomes necessary to shoot someone, multiple impacts are probably going to be required. There's probably not going to be anything like an immediate behavioral change. And by far the most likely behavioral change is that when you see one, they'll run away.
Well, I'm going to give you credit. You've made one of the best statements I ever heard. What do you expect from somebody after you shoot them? Probably be doing the same thing they did before you shot them.
Right.
And there's truth to that. I mean, I have been on the scene and I've seen people shot, and it's nothing like the movies.
Yes, and that
it's not. They're very animated for quite a long time.
And when their animation consists of them running away, I would call that a happy ending. But when they're not impressed and come at you, then it's a little less happy.
Yes.
Some of us have heard this story, but when I was overseas in a veteran of 2 days, I confronted my gunnery sergeant, and I said, "Gunny, it strikes me that the South Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese look remarkably alike. How is it that I'm supposed to tell the difference?" And I remember him taking a stubby cigar to his mouth, and he said, "Lieutenant, when they're running with you, they're South Vietnamese. When they're running after you, they're North Vietnamese." I found that pretty much true. The fact is, when whatever ammunition you're thinking about fails a Walmart test, I'm not interested. There's new calibers out there. We talked about this already, the 30 Super Carry. I'm not sure how super it is, but it's being marketed now, and whether it works or not, I really don't know. But if Walmart doesn't carry it, I'm really not interested. Because as I travel around the country, 9mm is the only caliber that makes sense for a serious gun, simply from the standpoint of availability. Most places I go, I can find 9mm. Most places in the world I go, I can find 9mm. When I teach in Africa, they never heard of 40 or 357 SIG. They might have seen 45 ACP in the movies, but they're familiar with 9mm. It's all hardball, of course, which we would consider barely adequate for practice, but right. It fits in our gun, and by golly, it shoots. And if hardball is all I could find, I would stuff it in my magazine and at least have something I can shoot.
Go forth and be happy.
Yeah. So in this country, we have access to what we call high-performance ammunition, made by some of the companies who were mentioned earlier. It's all wonderful stuff. In the rest of the world, that's a pipe dream. They can't get into that. They get hardball.
I think we probably have the best combative grade ammunition ever in history.
Yes. I would agree.
But it's still a long way from a phaser-on stun.
But still, we have to be careful when we teach that we will fill our students' minds with what we call unrealistic expectations. And this is, I think, the real crime, is when instructors say, by golly, you use a particular brand of ammunition and they'll explode in a shower of sparks. Or they'll drop to the ground immediately.
Well, I want to give Moss and Evan Marshall credit as the first two people that I knew of that when everything was 45, 45, 45, these two guys in print, in front of God and everyone, said, wait a minute, the 9mm's not that bad.
Yes.
You know, Evan was a homicide detective in Detroit, and I mean, he's seeing people shot with 9mm all the time. And he's saying, no, it's not as bad as people are leading you to believe, and you came in shortly thereafter and backed that up from the shootings that you have seen. That you must have taken a lot of crap for that.
Well, we still do. The whole 9 versus 45 thing is still with us. And there actually is a reason for that. If you look at it historically, everyone agrees the greater parity that we see perceived today between 9mm and 45 ACP is largely a function of the better ammunition that we have today. Sure. And that really started in the 1970s with the Plus P Plus 115 grain jacketed hollow .9 at 1,300 feet per second. When that was adopted by Illinois State Police, immediately they were seeing much faster stops than with the soft nose ammunition or the ball ammunition that they had started with. And New York City, we saw the same. They had ball ammo into the end of the 1990s out of political correctness. One police commissioner had said, I believe I'm quoting verbatim, I'm not going to be the commissioner that gives dumb bullets to New York cops. And in incidents like the Diallo shooting that led to the trial of 4 officers for murder, all of whom were acquitted, 41 shots were fired. It took 19 shots before that young man fell down. I believe, if I recall correctly, 3 of the 19 hits, the bullet stayed in the body. All the rest went through. At the time of that shooting, NYPD had finally made the decision to go to hollow points. They chose the 124 grain Spear Plus P Gold Dot. And the reason was, New York Times had done a Freedom of Information Act study and found in the several years prior there had been multiple cases of those ball rounds going through and through the perpetrator, striking a brother officer, striking an innocent bystander, or something of that nature. Unfortunately, they were just in the beginning of the transition process, and none of the 4 officers involved in the Diallo shooting were carrying anything but Winchester 115 grain ball. And if you look back in history, the gunfighting culture in America was really shaped in the 19th century and strengthened into the 20th century until after World War II and probably third quarter 20th century. With the exception of Wild Bill Hickok, none of the lawman gunfighters carried 36 caliber Navy Colts. And Hickok was such a good marksman, he put on marksmanship demonstrations in the towns that he served as a deterrent to the criminals. I mean, the guy was literally a sharpshooter. Damn near everybody said, we want a 44, we want a 45, because it's putting the bad guys down faster. We did get out of World War I the same feedback from the GIs shooting each other with pistols in the trenches. That the guys with the Americans shot with 9 mils would stay up and running for a while, and the guys shot with the 45s went down faster. And people today in this very vituperative argument will tell you, oh, that's anecdotal and therefore it's meaningless. Speak English. Look up the meaning of the word anecdote. Anecdote, something that happened. Anecdotal history is one element. It's one metric that needs to be taken into consideration. One of the curses of this whole argument was people saying, well, penetration is everything. No, velocity is everything. No, expansion is everything. Use common sense. Everything is something. Nothing is everything. The whole stopping power thing is something we are never going to be able to quantify, because simply too much of it is in the mind and the body and the endocrine system and the purpose of the man we have to shoot. Okay, was his brain fully oxygenated when we blew his heart out of his body with a 12-gauge buckshot round at close range? He's still got 18, 20 seconds of conscious, purposeful physical activity left. Were we able to cut that spinal cord that's only about as big as his little finger? He's probably going to drop like a rock. Did we go by it and maybe stun it a little bit? It's going to be a different response. So in essence, as we look at it, we've got to look at first the delivery system. Okay, as my brother said, we've got to get the bullets where they need to go. And every generation has, the epiphany. Wait, we've just figured out the key thing is where we hit them. No shit, Sherlock. Since men started shooting at each other, they knew that. But people get so caught up in what Jeff Cooper called PII, preoccupation with inconsequential increments, that they forget the basics. So in essence, one of the reasons for the rise of the 9mm has been the capability of the cartridge capability, the larger reservoir of ammunition. As some of us were discussing before the video, we're seeing today mag dumps, people who are literally officers who were literally taught, draw your 18-shot pistol and empty all 18 of them, and it's like throw enough at the wall, something's going to stick. And we see on the dash cam videos and the body cam videos, those bad guys staying up and running for way longer than they should have been. We need to be teaching the pace of speed for that individual at that particular distance with that particular weapon. And the 9mm, 18 rounds versus, let's say, 9 or 10 in the old days with the technology that we had then, simply gives you more chances to do that. So if somebody says to me, 9mm or 45, my answer is going to be yes. There are arguments for both.
Yes.
But before we look at the gun, there are a few cases where you could look at it afterwards and say, okay, if he had a different gun or different ammunition, it might have turned out better than it did. Most of the time, what it comes down to is, did you have the goddamn gun? We were able to get at it before he could get at his. We were able to get yours on him before he could get his on you. Did you make it clear to him that if he continued what he was doing, his life would end right there? And if he continues to force the issue, can you put a bullet through something he needs right now to keep trying to hurt innocent people? Only after that is it going to matter a rat's ass whether you were shooting a 22 or a 44 Magnum.
Well said. Very good.
Yeah. Mike?
How do I follow that up?
We're
going to try.
We're at the rat's ass, so I mean.
We all grew up in a time when bigger of anything was better. Big car, big house. And when I first started reading Colonel Cooper's stuff when I was a young lad, and this guy's on to something here, got to go with a 1911, 45 caliber bullet and that kind of thing. And I still shoot 1911s. I still like to shoot them. Now I shoot a lot of 9mm 1911s. Oddly enough, the first article I wrote that went on the big stage of combat handguns was titled something to the effect, "Do Real Men Carry Nines?" And this was right at the dawn of the Wonder 9 era, if you would, and I wrote a supportive article about the use of a 9mm projectile. And And anyway, here we are today, fast forward 40 whatever years. The FBI, you know, they had, back in the late 80s, I guess, after the Miami debacle, when they first started doing the gelatin testing and all that kind of thing, they came out 45, 45, 45, well, and 10 millimeter, of course. And now they're the biggest influencer on other law enforcement agencies, as we know, so we all started going with bigger guns. And of course, what the police carry is what the armed citizens want. So, and right around the same time, up to the late 90s, I guess, when we had, 94 actually, the crime bill of 94, or it's a crime bill, when suddenly, they can only carry 10 rounds on my 9 millimeter now, so let me go get a 45 again. So there you have it. So the 45, I think it peaked at that point in time, another renaissance, if you would. Somewheres, I don't know, got to be about 10 years ago now, the pendulum seemed to swing the other way again, where the FBI was telling us that maybe 9 millimeter is not so bad with the ammo enhancements and whatnot over the years. And they had some data that supported the fact that, first of all, your average agent was not a gunslinger, if you would. It was kind of indifferent to firearm training. They performed okay, not great. And they felt that the disparity in performance between the 9s and the 45s was such where we'll go with the 9s and we'll be okay. And that's pretty much where we are across the board today. You know, I paint both sides of the fence. I have in my carry collection, I do have a 45 caliber pistol I carry every now and again. But most of the time I'm going with the 9. And the simple reason is the ammunition is readily available. It's cheaper. Okay, and something I wrote up some years ago, not that long ago, where I took one manufacturer, identical pistol in 9, 40, 45, and shot him in some realistic little fun drills. And clearly, the 9 millimeter was the thing I could shoot the fastest and get the better hits with. I got good hits with the 45, but the disparity, the splits between the shots was significant, which may or may not be a big deal. I don't know. So that's where we're at with 9s and 45s in my book. I really don't care. You know, so carry what you're happy with.
Well, I think John hit it. That's the 9 millimeters here, and I don't see it changing anytime soon.
Yeah, Matt's brought up a good point that deserves to be emphasized. We have instructors out there who say things like, shoot them into the ground. That's one of the phrases, shoot them into the ground, meaning expend the entire magazine and just do that routinely. I think that's an excellent way to end up in a penitentiary.
I wish Ken Hackathorn was here. He related a wonderful story to me. He ran into a couple of young cops, and from the gear they had on, he could tell they were probably gun guys. And so he got into a conversation with them, and he asked them what they thought was the answer to a firearms-related problem. And they said it was a high-capacity pistol and shooting fast. And he followed it up with, well, do you think placing shots in specific areas is important? And he said the two of them looked at each other and smiled and said, only to old guys. Which certainly is this table, yourself included.
Yes.
But that is a message that troubles me greatly. Because if there are agencies actually teaching mag dumps and to shoot everything you can, we are just one blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl shot off a tricycle away from tragedy. And maybe somebody going to jail. So I'm just going to go right here and say it on camera. If you're teaching that, I know I'm a FUD, stop. Stop it. It's a terrible idea. It's going to do nothing but get people in trouble. You know, I'm starting to think that FUD means all-knowing, because every time I get called a FUD, it's usually a point I'm trying to make, and somebody else is making another point, and their point's just bullshit. It's so, you know, speed isn't everything. We've known for a long time that combative pistol craft is the balance of speed and accuracy, knowing which one at what particular time. And I really hope we can get back to that message.
When we all carried 6-shooters, of course, this was less of an issue because we ran out of ammunition pretty quickly. But now we're all carrying 16, 17, 18, 19 shooters, and there's that temptation to just get on that trigger and roar away. And at least in my experience, you know, Mass does more of this than I do, but in the cases I've been involved in, when you get on the stand and talk about how I fired a couple shots just to keep their heads down, the members of the jury who live downrange from that will fail to see the humor.
First of all, a pistol doesn't have firepower. A10 Warthog has firepower. What a pistol has is capacity. And that capacity is intended to keep you from having to reload in the middle of a gunfight. Because if you're in the middle of a gunfight and you're reloading, you're in a bad position. I don't care how fast you can do it. You're in a very, very bad spot. It's like clearing a stoppage. I don't care how fast you can clear a stoppage. If you're doing that in the middle of your fight, that's a bad thing to be, that's a bad position to be in. So pistol reliability, pistol capacity is so you don't have to do those things when you're fighting for your life. And I think we need to understand that.
We can reload after the gunfight instead of during the gunfight.
Absolutely.
Our friend and colleague Tom Gibbons defines that element as time in the fight. How long you can stay in the fight projecting force toward the enemy before you have to take a recess.
Yeah. I mean, people don't realize if you're reloading, you're clearing a stoppage in a gunfight, you're probably also moving to keep yourself from getting shot. And how many people practice those manipulations while they're moving rapidly? Most people would trip over their own feet.
Yeah, one of the biggest things we have to emphasize in our courses is getting your feet out of cement.
Yes.
When something happens, like the necessity of a reload or the necessity of reducing a stoppage, invariably, people do two things. They plant their feet in cement and they gawk at their gun. The kiss of death. We have to get your head up. There's no fight going on here. The fight is out there. And we get your feet out of cement. Yeah, if you're gonna have any chance of living through this.
When I had my training company, I had an entire course that I called Kinetic Pistolcraft.
I love it.
And it was all movement. Mm-hmm. And you'd be surprised how many gun club officers melted down when I started having people doing that kind of movement.
Yes.
And including movement back up range. Now, we spent a sizable amount of time working on muzzle diversion, you know, so you can move, because you got to be able to move in a 360-degree environment.
Sure.
But people would literally just lose their shit because you weren't standing with your feet in concrete.
Right.
Mike, you've done a lot of law enforcement.
Was definitely tagged as a malcontent by our police training commission back at home, because same thing, traditional police firearms training, which is, you know, stand there flat-footed, fat, dumb, and happy at the 7, 15, 25-yard line and wail away. And this crazy guy Boyle's got people moving on the range with their guns are out of their holster. Imagine that, you know. But you know, we continue to do that, and finally, you know, other people have gotten with the program, thank God. And they only think I'm half crazy now. But lo and behold, you know, just getting back to the capacity thing, something on my mind anyway. You know, I live in a limited freedom state, and you know, I no longer am a full-time officer. And although I can carry a gun, they say, well, if you get our special permit from the state, you can have a 15-round magazine, but if not, you can only carry a 10-round magazine. But I don't know of anybody who's been in any sort of exchange of gunfire wish they had less rounds in their pistol. This has too many bullets in it. Let me get a couple out of here, you know. But anyway, it's kind of a dilemma. And I know there's some folks who still carry revolvers on a regular basis. You know, I'll carry one every now and then as a sneaky backup gun or what have you, or in the pocket. But you know, by and large, more bullets in my estimation is always better. Hopefully, you're not going to need them. And you know, the history of gunfighting and the not police world, but the armed civilian world typically tells us very few rounds are expended. You were like, I often look at the American Rifleman and look through those events, and on the cover page there, or inside a couple of pages inside, they outline about 8 or 6 events every month about armed citizens who've been in some sort of armed conflict and whatnot. And typically there are just a few odd rounds fired. But every now and then you'll find one where there's been buku rounds fired. So Erring on the side of caution, once again, I think greater capacity, and getting back to what we talked about just a few moments ago about the 9 mils. Would I rather have 16 rounds in my pistol or 8 rounds? Let me think about that. I'll go with the 16, thank you very much.
Well, that's a good point. And stopping power, that's kind of takes us to, I know we've already talked about stopping power.
I think Moss pretty much hit it. It's a myth.
Yes. And remember, too, the protocols, the testing. Prior to the shooting, the 1986 Miami shooting of the FBI, there really were no protocols for testing ammunition, testing projectiles. People would shoot wet phone books, people would shoot into water,
Right.
but there really wasn't a systematic way of testing ammunition. The FBI decided they were going to do their own protocols, compound angle of the glass, the gypsum board, the steel, the bare gelatin, shooting people naked on the beach, and some clothing on that too. But how many of us remember going forward to the late 90s, say 98, to the INS protocols?
Right.
I have a copy of that.
Now, the INS protocol, that was interesting because I actually sat in on that one with all the bullet designers that were invited to the Altoona, Pennsylvania facility. And they had it very clear. They told every bullet, now in that room was every bullet designer in the country. Every bullet that had been done by a major manufacturer, the folks were in there that designed them. And it was interesting because the INS had a very simple approach. They said, we're shooting people crossing the border, and we have to deal with what they call the Mexican suitcase. And we all looked at each other like, the what? And they said the Mexican suitcase is people going across the border wearing multiple layers of clothing, not carrying it, but wearing it. So now they may have 2 pairs of pants, 3 or 4 shirts, 2 jackets. They're faster that way. They were using .357 Magnums, 125 grain semi-jacketed hollow points. They switched to 40 Smith & Wesson, 180 grain jacketed hollow points. And all of a sudden now, one shot with a .357 Magnum will usually get someone's attention. Now all of a sudden they were running into problems with the 40 Smith & Wessons. They're not stopping them on the border. So they decided they wanted to go to a new protocol, not just, well, the FBI method, let's look at something else. The FBI said deep penetration, heavy, going slow, summing it up in the simplest of terms. The INS said, we don't shoot through glass, we don't shoot through steel, we don't shoot through walls, gypsum board, we shoot heavy clothing. And now that we're stuck with a 40 Smith & Wesson, we want to go with something else. So all of a sudden now they actually came out with a protocol that was more to the civilian side. And they ended up with, to your point, yes, the 155 grain jacketed hollow point. In fact, I remember being involved in that with bringing them the Quick Shock that broke into 3 pieces. But that was, it was, I think, a pivotal point. But unfortunately, we had 9/11. And after 9/11, the INS changed, with ICE and just restructuring, and all of a sudden that Altoona, Pennsylvania testing protocol went away.
Back then we had testing, and we didn't have a lot of street data because we weren't really paying attention. What we've done since the FBI shootout in 1986 is we've started doing a lot more testing, and we've started taking more note of what's actually happening in shootouts. And we now have come to a point decades later where we've been able to rectify the testing with what's happening in actual shootings. And I think we now have a pretty good idea of what we need. And each agency is going to do that based on what their individual need is. And let's face it, an urban environment may not have the same criteria as, say, an Oklahoma highway patrolman.
For example, the FBI protocol calls for, 12 to 18 inches of penetration. For personal defense, 9 to 15, I think makes more sense. The FBI is concerned about shooting through glass and shooting through other things. For personal defense, we're less concerned with that. We're really not ever going to know much about this.
No. It's an educated guess at best.
And when decisions are made by large departments, of course, they're laden with agendas. And, you know, the people making these decisions have their own prejudices. It's all understandable. We're only too human, you know. I like in 9mm between 115 and 124 grain plus P hollow point. You won't go wrong with Spear Gold Dot. No. That's always excellent. No. I like the all copper bullets. Defiant makes an excellent 115 grain round. That's what I'm carrying right now. Underwood is another manufacturer I like. Kevin Underwood is really dedicated to this. And all the big manufacturers, of course, they make acceptable stuff too. But that's what I prefer. I don't like any 147 grain round, although I'm in a minority on that. In some circles, they think that's wonderful. I don't care for it.
Well, they're better than they used to be. I think right after the FBI chose the Winchester, you know where I'm headed with this. Right after they chose the Winchester OSM load because it was going to penetrate so much better than the Winchester Silvertip. I'm just going to say it. I was a real champion. I read that FBI report, and by God, we got to switch over to that bullet, and we need to do it now. And I really championed it, and I got us to change over to the 147 OSM because the FBI said. I wished I had talked to Evan Marshall about it because, you know, each one of the people that were involved in that meeting that they had, I found out much later that Evan's part of that report was greatly redacted and cut back. Because talking to him later, he told me about some of the concerns he had with that bullet, and they came to fruition.
Again,
I believe my agency had one of the first shootings in the nation. And it was almost exactly like what happened with the FBI. We had a legitimate child kidnapping, not a domestic where the father snatches the kid. This is a pervert that snatched a little girl off the street. And our deputy confronted him in a parking lot. Little kid was sitting in the passenger seat. The suspect was sitting with his hands on the steering wheel like this. The deputy confronted him at about 15 to 18 feet through an open window. The suspects, they're going back and forth. The suspect looked like he's getting ready to take out from the car. Our deputy fires, bam! Bullet goes right here into the arm. Well, according to the FBI, that penetrating bullet should have went right through their arm, right through the chest, and hit this guy in the heart. It didn't. It stopped right in his elbow, right here. Guy took off, ended up with like a 2-hour chase with all kinds of cars crashed and property damage and all that kind of stuff. They finally got the guy stopped, saved the girl, arrested him. But who do you think had egg on their face because I was the one that lobbied for this? The crime lab chronographed the remaining rounds in that officer at Deputy 669. It had a median velocity of 609 feet per second. They pulled all the rounds off and reissued 115 Winchester Silvertip the next day. Took a long time for me to get my credibility back, and so I was really skeptical about 147 grain bullets for a whole long time. Now, as I say what I said, they're better than they used to be.
Yes.
But I don't know. I because of such situations like that, it's really hard to say, yep, that's what we need to do. Let's do that.
Well, someone's got to make the decision, of course. And again, as you pointed out with Evan Marshall's comments, there's lots of agendas at work.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there trying to sell ammunition.
Well, apparently what happened in our agency shooting was exactly the things that Evan was concerned about, but they were cut out of that final report, which was unfortunate.
Right.
Now, do you guys remember the Strasbourg tests?
I still have a copy.
Yeah.
Most people today have no idea about the white alpine goats. I can't remember now, was it 500, 600 white alpine goats?
Average weight, 168 pounds.
Yeah, and I remember Tom Brzezinski, the inventor of the Hydra-Shock, Starfire, pretty much every bullet out there. I remember he had the Quick Shock at that time prototype, and he found out which stores the people behind the Strasbourg tests were going to the stores to buy ammo off the shelf. So they didn't want manufacturers sending them ammo. They wanted to buy it off the shelf. And Tom made some prototype ammo, and made sure he got it in those stores. And that's how I believe 2 of them, a 9, maybe 357, got included in the Strasbourg test. Because at that time, Quick Shock was not out in handgun ammunition. We hadn't released it yet. But it was interesting because back then, they were measuring incapacitation time. That was their critical thing. If the projectile hit the goat, the stopwatch started, and they had them hooked up to an EKG and an EEG, and they were looking for incapacitation time. So like the best projectiles, like a 357, 125 semi-jacketed hollow point, 1350 feet per second, was averaging like a 7-second, going off memory now, 7-second incapacitation time, where ball would be on the opposite end of the spectrum. And that was the first time that Evan Marshall and Ed Sano were able to say, aha, what we see here is light projectiles going very fast, trying to basically emulate a rifle cartridge, okay? We're working better in incapacitation time on the poor white alpine goats versus the heavy bullets going slow. And that sort of kind of carried what Evan was writing about and Ed was writing about. And now you got involved with Triton. If you remember, that's what we pushed, light going fast.
You did. I remember when Tom Brzezinski asked why wasn't I quoting in articles from the Strasbourg test. I explained, look, you've got this other faction who's saying you guys are all liars and it never happened.
Yes.
For me to quote, I've got to see video, I've got to see the EKGs, I've got to see the EEGs. And he said, well, I can't give you that. And I said, if you can't give me that, I've got to treat it as if it didn't exist.
Yeah, I remember Fackler. Fackler was totally into heavy bullets going slow.
Right.
He went to Strasbourg, Switzerland, Sweden,
France. I don't know. Where the hell is Strasbourg, France?
Wherever it was, he went there and he's like, no, there's no goats here. It's like, no, it had nothing to do with it. But oh my God.
I think we're sitting closer to where it happened than Strasbourg.
A legitimate scientific test, I would say, as close to scientific as you can get, versus shooting blocks of gelatin.
Correct.
To shoot a goat that was the closest way to a human, to see what it was going to do and what the incapacitation time was. And that was where, back then in the ammo industry, we call the 9mm the 9 minimum, the 380.
9 millimeter.
Yes, yes. And then the mouse cartridges were the 380, the 32. Oh my God, there was a 25 ACP that people actually still touted. But I still remember where, to your point of depth of penetration, that's what the INS wanted. The INS was looking at 8 to 12, 8 to 14. Mm-hmm. If it exited a 16-inch block of gel, that was over penetration, as far as they were concerned. And whereas the FBI's attitude was, if it exited a 16-inch block of gel, it was still viable. So, but Moss, I mean, you were integrally involved with us when it came to the distribution of our ammo, and I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I found your ammunition will work effectively in slaughterhouse testing. One of the things you find when you get to that area of the 124, 125 grain bullet, 1300, 1250, 1220 even feet per second, you're starting to get reports of extreme effectiveness. Las Vegas Metro gets into a hell of a lot of shootings. They had started with 9mm 115 silver tip, influenced by FBI, went to the 147 subsonic, told me they had had numerous stopping failures with it, and they went to the 124 plus P, Gold Dot. They issue Gold Dot for all 3 authorized calibers. Everybody on Las Vegas Metro buys their own gun now. 40, 9mm, or 45 ACP. The 45 ACP and the 40 are heavy for caliber, 230 grain and 180 grain respectively. But the 9mm is the 124 plus P, rated for about 1220 foot seconds out of, say, a 4-inch Glock 19. And they're telling me they can't tell the difference. And they're now recommending the new recruits buy the 9 because they're going to get the same effect downrange as with these slower bullets, but less recoil and more in-gun reservoir. NYPD historically, going back to the late 19th century, complained about being issued feeble guns with feeble ammunition. Teddy Roosevelt had gotten them the 32 new police in 1996. Somewhere in the early 20 teens, they switched to 38 Special, but 158 grain round nose lead. And the guys at the PBA, the Police Benevolent Association, the Patrolmen's Union, told me back when NYPD was firing 1,000 to 2,000 rounds a year on the street, that, look, this stuff, that we call it the Widowmaker because you can shoot the guy 6 times in the chest with it and he'll still make your wife a widow before he falls down. When they finally got the hollow points in 1999, gold dot 124 plus P for the 9, and for those who still had revolvers, 158 soft lead hollow point, the complaints stopped. The complaints from the people with the boots on the ground stopped. The ammo was finally doing the job and stopping the bad guys. So you combine the fact that that ammunition does very well on the FBI protocols, and we're getting the good feedback from all these departments, and none of the departments with the 124 plus P are complaining about it. You put them all together and carry the one, it looks like we've got something viable. If you're worried about looking at the ballistics table, that 125 grain 357 Magnum, it was loaded to 1450 foot-seconds out of a 4-inch barrel. Now, you've got some of the folks today saying, oh, that was all a myth. One theory that I first heard from Marty Fackler in 1990 when I visited him at the Presidio at his lab in San Francisco was that it was the deafening blast and flash that was making bad guys fall down, causing a psychological thing. And I got on his bad side by saying, so if we issue them those Winchester 357 blanks that are really loud and flashy, we'll stop everybody with one shot and there'll be no lawsuits. And he looked at me like Grumpy Cat. And we're still hearing that theory today. But you talk to the departments where they had it. Kentucky State Police, Indianapolis, Indiana State Police, and onward. They were getting one-shot stops even in non-vital parts of the body. And something was happening there that was simply taking the fight out of the bad guys. You might not be able to quantify it in gelatin, but it's happening. Now, the detectives and the off-duty guys at that time, you were using the same ammunition in 2.5-inch barrel, Model 66s and Model 19s, and not seeing much difference in the stopping power. Well, 357, you lose velocity a whole lot faster than you do in 9mm. And you take that 1450 foot-second 125 grain mag load, run it out of, say, a 2-inch J-frame Model 60, you're going to get about 1,200 to 1,220 foot-seconds. So 125 at 1,200 to 1,220, 124 plus P9, carry the one. Mm-hmm. I don't lose sleep carrying a 124 plus P.
But Dan, we're talking about something that we've known historically since the 90s. We've known this since the 90s, and to this day, we're still debating this,
It's almost like we should be looking at the bullet weights the cartridge was designed around.
Oh, here we go. It's a whole other subject. It's a whole other topic.
Thanks for joining us for this installment of Inside Story. I hope you enjoyed it. Stay tuned for the next episode where you're going to learn more from the OGs and hopefully learn something.